Hey, it's Tom here and welcome back to the channel. Now, this is going to be a Q&A video largely focused on the recent trip that I had to the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting in Omaha. I'm actually, as of yesterday, back home here in New Zealand and not too jet lagged. Fingers crossed that doesn't kick in the next couple of days as well. And I thought it would be interesting to just kind of go through and answer any questions you might have about what it was like kind of going to the meeting. I went over there with the intention of like filming little vlog videos and stuff, and that wasn't quite as successful as I hoped it would be. So we did do a couple of podcasts. So if you're interested in kind of myself, Brandon from New Money, and Hamish Hodder chatting through our experience going to the meeting, check out the last two episodes of their kind of podcast, the Young Investors podcast. We covered a few kind of cool stories on that, but I will answer some more specific questions from you, the subscribers, in this video. So let's get straight into it. And if you do ever want to ask a question for a future Q&A video, just basically keep an eye out on my community post page here on YouTube. That's where I always collect the questions. Okay, so first question here is from Amizi87. Did attending the Berkshire meeting where you met so many titans and lining up with Brett Kelly and co. alter your approach to creating wealth? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think in terms of, earning money and investing that cash and stocks and so on, and a strategy to do with that, really nothing's changed. I mean, I've been following Buffett and Munger for years at this point, been following Berkshire Hathaway for years at this point. It was very cool to be at kind of the Q&A annual meeting in person and, see Warren and Charlie kind of answer questions in the flesh. But in terms of the actual strategy, nothing really has changed. It's sort of Warren and Charlie sometimes get a little criticized actually for repeating the same things over and over again, but really the strategy is unchanged for decades and it kind of continues to work. So from an investing perspective, that definitely hasn't changed. Lining up with Brett and then also obviously spending basically 2 weeks with Brandon from the New Money channel and Hamish was great just to kind of see how they run their businesses from YouTube and all the other things that they've got kind of surrounding YouTube. Those guys are definitely a lot more professional than me when it comes to filming and getting good lighting and editing and planning and scripting content and so on. So definitely learned a lot from them, and I think it's potentially given me a bit of motivation just to kind of go after some goals of mine that are YouTube related, perhaps a little more aggressively than I'd maybe planned to. But in terms of, investing money, really not a whole lot has changed. So appreciate your question. Next one is from Compound 72. How has the trip changed or solidified your investment approach? Like I say, not a whole lot has changed, but I do see you've got a second question here, Compound 72, so I'll get into that one. Did you get any valuable new insights into SRG, which is obviously Seritage Growth Property? So we did actually sit down and film an in-person podcast with Matthew Peterson when we were in Austin. And Matt knows Seritage very well. He's been invested in it for a long time. He uses his sort of structured value strategy of, selling put options to own the underlying equity and that sort of thing. That's something he's done with Seritage. So we definitely covered that on the podcast. We talked about Seritage's recent switch from a real estate investment trust to a C Corp. We talked about potential transactions that might happen at Seritage and kind of a whole range of other things. So I won't do it justice just answering it in a Q&A video right now, but what I would say is just keep an eye out for the Investing with Tom podcast, YouTube channel and iTunes and Spotify and so on. And you should see that episode as soon as it goes live. I think if you're a Daily Journal or Alibaba kind of follower, you will probably enjoy that episode as well, because we talked about, Munger selling out of some of his Alibaba stake and that sort of thing too. But I don't know that there were any significant changes in how I view SRG, but we definitely got into some nuances around some of the details with Seritage. So thanks for your question. Okay, next question is from Tony G. Tony, I see you've got a few questions here, so I will answer one of them here. Did you go to Houston? What did you do there? Did you attend the Offshore Technology Conference while there? Did going to Houston in combo with Buffett's Chevron and Occidental Petroleum buys shift your focus to oil, gas, commodities? And if so, please share your insights. Yes, so we did go to Houston. Basically, the trip was we flew into LA, so I met up with Brandon Hamish in Sydney, first of all. We flew to LA, flew to Omaha. That was like a 27-hour journey or something by the time we left Sydney and arrived in Omaha. We obviously did the Berkshire meeting, but we were in Omaha for a few days, kind of either side of the Berkshire weekend. We then went to Austin, filmed with Matt and everything, and then went to Houston. I then flew home, and the other guys are carrying on for a couple more days to go to Orlando and Universal Studios and that sort of thing. So, had a bit of a look in Houston. We went to a baseball game, watched the Houston Astros play the Detroit, whatever the name of the team from Detroit is. Someone in the comments can tell me that. Just walking around the city, we saw a lot of the oil and gas kind of history kind of all around the city, with various, plaques around the city on, how that influenced the growth of that area. It's something I don't know a huge amount about, but we got a little bit of a taste of it, I guess. And I think it's super interesting to see Buffett sinking a lot of money into oil. He clearly thinks that he's going to get an adequate return given the risks with oil and so on. I must say I don't have a particularly strong view on it. I have made some commodity investments in the past. They weren't in oil or gas. I think I could probably get there with a bit of work and kind of understanding those industries, but it's really not a strong point for me at the moment. And there's a few other companies, particularly with some fairly volatile pricing right now, that have been on my watch list for a while that I'm kind of prioritizing, I would say. So thanks for your question. Next one is from Jonathan. Did Hamish sell you on Texas Roadhouse the whole trip? LOL. No, he did not. Texas Roadhouse sold itself, really, I would say. Actually, I was very impressed with Texas Roadhouse. I think if you're in New Zealand and you've never been to a Texas Roadhouse, I think you could probably think of it like a Lone Star like we have in New Zealand, except like way better. So, it was absolutely packed. We walked past one in Omaha and lines were like out the door because you can't pre-book to go to Texas Roadhouse. We went to this one in Houston, and we actually also randomly saw Willie Nelson, famous singer, who actually owned the specific Texas Roadhouse that we went to. And it was very cool. Food was good, atmosphere was amazing, it was packed. I'm a big country music fan, and they were cranking the country music. So I really, really enjoyed Texas Roadhouse. And Hamish did definitely give us a few of kind of the stats that he knew from researching Texas Roadhouse for a long time. It was really interesting to see the average revenue that Texas Roadhouse generates per restaurant, which is substantially higher than the competition, way higher than even the likes of McDonald's and so on. So pretty interesting. They keep, apparently, I haven't really looked at it, but going there, and Hamish, talking about it has maybe motivated me to take a closer look. But apparently they, grow restaurant numbers very conservatively, but they have been just cranking out these huge same-store sales growth numbers for a long time, and people have been sort of questioning, how far they can push that. And going there and just seeing how packed it was, I can see, what consistent same-store sales growth for a long time looks like in the flesh. It was really impressive, actually. So thanks for your question there. Next one is from Luis. I'm guessing this was your first trip to America. If so, what was your largest surprise about the USA, or maybe anything you thought was odd as a foreigner? Also, what would you most like to see / do on a future trip? So I don't know if we went to the typical tourist spots in our trip to America. Maybe when we went to Austin and that sort of thing, it was getting a little closer to that. But I don't know that there's a whole lot of overseas tourists going to the likes of Omaha, Nebraska, but it was cool to get there. This is not meant to offend any Americans or anything watching, but I sort of said to Brandon, I think it was 4 or 5 days into the trip, I was like, Brandon, you know what? America is pretty much exactly as I'd expected it to be. They seem to have kind of the same experience. So maybe, the American content and stuff we get exposed to here is actually reasonably accurate. I'm not too sure. But the only thing I would say that really surprised me in Omaha, there were definitely some really nice areas. There were definitely some kind of more dangerous areas. And we had a couple Uber drivers and stuff kind of warn us about, don't walk that direction and so on. So that's just something that just wouldn't happen, frankly, in 99.9% of places in New Zealand. So that surprised me a little bit. I definitely knew there was going to be some of that with places we were going, but that was a little bit of a surprise. And I mentioned it on the Young Investors podcast, but the coffee in America is just horrendous, and I can see why place like Starbucks has done okay. Like Starbucks isn't super high quality coffee, but you know what you're going to get. That's kind of what a brand moat is at some of these places, right? You know what you're going to get, and it's okay. But when you like make a pot of Mr. Coffee or whatever at your Airbnb, like, man, that stuff's horrific. I don't know how you guys do that. And I always see people come to New Zealand or even Australia and say, you know, the coffee's fantastic. Like, we go to a cafe and it's really good. And I was always kind of surprised to hear people say things like that. But now that I've gone to the US and experienced what Americans call coffee, man, I didn't think I was much of a coffee snob, but I feel much more that way after going and drinking American coffee. But anyhow, next question is from After Dinner Investor. How has coming to the United States and experiencing it firsthand influenced the way you think about investing in American companies? Good question. I don't know that a huge amount has changed, really. We got to see some American companies in the flesh, again, like a Texas Roadhouse or even a Starbucks. You know, with that example I just gave, I now have a good understanding of why Starbucks seems to have done really well in the US, but it just never has got any traction in Australia and New Zealand. I think I understand some of the reasons why that might be now, but it really hasn't changed a whole lot. And, you know, the US is so big, like we only went to so we spent like a couple hours in LA walking around between flights. You know, we went to Omaha, which is a kind of random place to go, really, I think. And, you know, we went to Austin and Houston. So we definitely got a feel for a few areas, but it's not like we've just spent a year touring the entire United States or anything. But it turns out, you know, that some of these businesses that we don't have in New Zealand, but I'm always hearing about or reading about in investment research, it turns out they do actually exist in the flesh. So it was nice to confirm that. But yeah, not too much has changed in the way that I view America as a place to you know, buy businesses and invest money. So thanks for your question. Next one is from Super Red 1313, I guess that is. Are you interested to invest in Matthew Peterson funds? Do you know what the minimum to invest there is? Yeah, I think that is information that's reasonably straightforward to find if you just look up the Matt Peterson annual report. It should have new contribution kind of amounts, and I think he's got a couple of different fee structures. He's got like the 0.625 model, or it might be like a 0.525 model. Very similar to the old school Buffett partnerships for investors over a certain amount of money, and I believe if you're below that threshold there might be a small management fee as well, but confirm that with Matt. Don't take my word for it. I believe it's reasonably easy to find in his annual reports and, you know, investor materials on his website and so on. If I was ever going to invest in a hedge fund, it would probably be with someone running a strategy like Matt's. You know, he invests in a relatively focused, concentrated kind of way. It's very well researched on each individual company. He's got a long-term time horizon. He's willing to hold through volatility and maybe even take advantage of that. And he's got this nice sort of structured value options overlay, which actually enhances the return from you know, those companies and the research he's doing as well. So Matt's one of the smartest investors I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to in person, and yeah, I have no intention to invest with Matt or any fund right now. I'm enjoying managing my own money, but if I ever went down that track, he'd certainly be on my list. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But you know, I'm not a financial advisor. I can't recommend funds or anything. So do your own work on that one for sure. So next question: how are you handling current market conditions psychologically? Also, how is meeting Lee Lu? So. Yeah, the current market conditions one, don't know, I've barely felt it, to be honest. I definitely have stocks in my portfolio that are down. I have had 2 transactions, but besides some tax stuff a little while back, but I've basically had 2 transactions for the entire year, actually also excluding buying my one Berkshire B share. So if you exclude all that stuff for me to get into the annual meeting, I've basically had 2 kind of real transactions in my portfolio this year, and they're both in the last week or 2. They're both adding to existing positions at kind of lower prices. So I guess that's how I'm handling it psychologically. You know, American and New Zealand and Australian and probably global business as a whole will be worth a lot more in 10 or 20 or 30 years, and I plan to keep investing, you know, over that period of time. So if there's short-term dislocations, I'm happy to keep buying. You know, maybe in the next 6 months or a year, those purchases look really dumb and prices just continue downwards, but you know, that's kind of stuff that's out of my control. I'm buying good businesses at reasonable prices or mediocre businesses at really, really good prices. That's basically my strategy. And also, yeah, how was meeting Lee Lu? So Lee Lu was sitting directly across from us, literally within like 2 meters of Brandon, who was on the end of a row at the Berkshire meeting. He was getting pretty swarmed, to be honest, once people started recognizing him, and people were actually being kind of like surprisingly rude, I think, and like, you know, shoulder barging people out of the way to get next in line to get a photo with Lee Lu. But I managed to get there eventually, and I felt a little sorry for the guy actually, because he was just being swarmed, and like, you know, there was quite a big line of people trying to take photos with him, and you know, someone would take a photo and then instead of carrying on and letting the next guy come in, they'd say, you know, what do you think of Facebook, and do you think it's okay to pay up a little bit for a reasonable business and all this stuff? And it's like, come on, man, just let's keep things moving here. So it was exceptionally cool to meet Lee Lu, and kind of crazy that he was just sitting across the road from us. He was loving some of the stuff that Charlie was saying during the meeting. He was kind of cracking up and laughing at some of the things Charlie had to say through the, you know, Berkshire meeting. So that was very cool. Next question. So Sean Quinn asked, can you speak about your dinner with Guy Spier? You mentioned it in the podcast, but I'd like to know more about how you were invited, how Guy interacted with his investors, or anything you particularly enjoyed at the dinner. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, sure. So I did get invited to the Aquamarine Fund dinner. Basically how that happened is I initially wanted to schedule another podcast with Guy, and we're hopefully still going to make that happen. I then basically reached out to Guy and said, hey, I'm going to be in Omaha. Would you like to do the podcast in person? But, you know, Guy's weekend is just crazy. He had like a big meet and greet. He's got a lot of different events on kind of surrounding the Berkshire meeting. And he said, you know, basically, sorry, Tom, I'm just way too busy. But how would you like to come along to the Aquamarine Fund dinner instead? So that was just super nice of Guy. He had absolutely no obligation to invite me to a dinner or anything. But it was very cool to go to. There were probably 20 or so people there, I would say. I chatted to Guy a couple of times, but you know, he was for the most part busy talking to other, you know, investors and stuff. That was obviously sort of most of the people at the dinner were actually invested in, you know, Aquamarine with Guy Spier. In terms of, you know, interacting with investors, he just, you know, treats them like friends and partners, basically, I would say. I think he's had very long-term relationships with a lot of the people there. So that was very cool. And it was also kind of nice chatting with, you know, people that were invested in the fund or other people that weren't necessarily invested but were there and were very successful business people and so on. It was definitely a cool event. And very randomly, when I was waiting to catch an Uber to go home, because this is the night before the Berkshire meeting and I was planning to get up at 3 a.m. the next morning, so they decided to wrap the dinner up reasonably early so everyone could get a good night's sleep. And I was waiting to get an Uber to go back to our Airbnb, and actually standing there kind of chatting to William Green. He was waiting for an Uber as well, and I got in just before him and stole the closest Uber, so sorry, William. But just as I was doing that, literally like Bill Gates pulled up and with a couple of security guys and shot inside to this hotel, so that was kind of crazy as well. But yeah, that's what it was like going to the dinner. Next question is from Elon. Did you invite any super investors to your podcast? Yeah, so hoping to do something with Guy here soon, but fingers crossed we can make that happen. And also, I've got this episode in the works with Matt Peterson, but nothing else planned at this stage. Okay, so let's do a couple more questions. I am the one who knocks asks, is there anything that you learnt that was truly new to you or something that made you reconsider your beliefs? Yeah, I guess that touches on kind of a couple of previous questions. I don't think there's really anything that fundamentally changed on the trip as far as my investment strategy. Yeah, just going to the Berkshire meeting in general often. I think Prabrai has described it previously as, you know, you go to the Berkshire meeting each year and all the, you know, the windscreen gets cleaned with all these weird ideas that have crept into your head over the last year, and you suddenly have this sense of clarity moving forward after listening to Buffett again. So definitely experienced a little bit of that. I probably would have experienced the same thing having watched the Berkshire meeting online, frankly, but it was very, very cool to be there in person and meet a lot of people. We had a bunch of people kind of, you know, say hi and take photos and stuff, and that was a pretty cool experience as well. And if you happen to be one of those people, if you end up posting it online or anything, definitely tag me. It'd be cool to see more of those photos. So Let's do one last question from Len. Would you think about moving over there permanently, and are you going back next year? Good question. As much as I enjoyed my trip and my time in the US, I'm still of the strong opinion that New Zealand is the best place on the planet, and I have no intention of moving over to the US permanently. And in terms of are you going back next year, certainly not ruling it out. It was a very, very fun weekend. And even actually, I think a lot of people kind of focus on the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting itself. It was really the events surrounding the meeting that were probably the highlight for me, honestly. We had the Guy Spier dinner, we had a barbecue that Matthew Peterson hosted, we had a Guy Spier, William Green meet and greet, we had the Markel brunch I managed to get along to, the Value After Hours crew with Toby Carlisle, Jake Taylor, Bill Brewster had a meet up after the meeting, so had a beer with those guys and that kind of thing. So that was all just a ton of fun. So would I consider going back next year? For sure, but it's a very long trip. It's 24 to 30 hours of travel basically each direction to get to Omaha from New Zealand, and it's a big commitment, reasonably expensive, but I think worth it for sure. So unsure if I'll go back next year at this stage, but I'd certainly love to do it again. I think that's all the questions we've pretty much got time for this one, so thank you to everyone who did ask a question on this Q&A video. I hope my answers were helpful and it gave you a bit of an idea of what it was like to go to the Berkshire meeting, but that's it from me for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.